Nalin Surie, former High Commissioner to UK and Ambassador to China and Poland, is joining us now to talk about the implications of this meeting. Ambassador Surie, thank you so much for speaking with us here on ET Now. Your first really response to the statements which have been put out after the meeting, there was a lot of candor in them, especially from External Affairs Minister, saying that the relationship is not normal. Talks and the bilateral relationship cannot go forward with the Galwan issue not yet resolved. Then the question is, why did they meet?
Well, I think when the foreign minister of your largest neighbor wants to expresses an interest that he would like to come and discuss outstanding and other issues, the normal reaction of any sensible foreign office would be to say yes, and that is what we did. Now, the question is, why did Mr. Wang Yi visit? To my mind, Mr. Wang Yi's visit was in the nature of a scouting mission. He came to Pakistan, went to Afghanistan, and after Delhi, he's going to go to Nepal. Now, if you're sitting in Beijing, the scenario in this part of the world is not particularly great insofar as the Chinese are concerned. Afghanistan is not settled and is not likely to be settled for a long time. Pakistan, there are problems. I mean, we do not know which way the government is going to go. In Nepal, for instance, which is a very strong BRI candidate for the Chinese, the Americans have promised a huge infrastructure projects funding. In India, well, there is no trust left in the relationship. On top of that, you have the Ukraine crisis. And the problem for the Chinese is not so much that Russia and Ukraine are at war. The problem is that they have signed on 4th February a very major, extravagant, and what I would call misjudged agreement between Russia and China. So I think, and this has implications for China. I think you may have noted that the NATO summit yesterday, the declaration has a full paragraph on China and expecting China not to come to the assistance of Russia in any aspect of the conflict. So I think if you're sitting in Beijing, you need to at least, you're not looking for new allies, but you're certainly trying to reduce the temperature. Now, Mr. Wang Yi didn't help his case by making that uncalled for statement on Kashmir at the OIC meeting. But that is, I think, probably in the nature of trying to deliberately needle us and to remind us that the Chinese also have cards to play. So I think this was a scouting mission. He will go back and report what is happening in this part of the world. And I think he also wanted to assess, without asking, how committed we are to the Indo-Pacific and to the Quad. You may have heard from the External Affairs Minister that these issues he did not raise, but he would have come to assess how it's going to play out. And I think our commitment to both the Indo-Pacific and the Quad remains very firm, irrespective of some members of Quad trying to suggest that we are the weak link. We are not the weak link. In fact, we are amongst the strongest links.
Ambassador Surie, India is finding itself in a very interesting position geopolitically. Our relationship with the Quad continues to be strong, despite us not having given into the pressure to come out in a very forceful statement vis-a-vis Russia in the ongoing conflict. We've had visits in the last few weeks from representatives from all members of the Quad, really. Now the Chinese have come calling. How are we really playing this balancing act? And do you think that the new geopolitical situation has put India in a very prominent position vis-a-vis the rest of the world?
I think we should not get carried away with this, to my mind. Excuse me. See, yes, people are asking to come and meet you because there is a need for India. And there has always been a felt need for India, except now the felt need is that much greater. That's because you're also a much bigger economy, you're a much bigger military power, and you are very committed to establishing an international and Indo-Pacific order that is open, inclusive, and based on the UN Charter and other rules of international law. Now, I think this should not be confused with values of different parties being the same thing. Here's a question of national interest. And our national interests require us to do what we have done. I think we've played our cards rather well so far. But we should not get carried away by that. People are coming to you because they expect something from you. The question is, what are you going to get in return? And that is where the skill of the Foreign Office and the government comes into play.
Vis-a-vis China and their very overt and clear support for Russia, India's position so far, do you think part of the mission, and you call it a scouting mission, Ambassador Surie, was also to sense how far India is willing to go to maintain our neutral stance as this conflict now enters its second month?
Well, I think that could have been a reason, but I think there are already some signals, I do not know how serious they are, that there are elements within China which believe that the 4th February agreement between the presidents of Russia and China was perhaps went too far. There is a hint from the Chinese ambassador in Washington saying that there are, of course, limits to our collaboration. It will be within the UN Charter. Now, I'm not sure one should read too much into these statements as of now, because so far, the Chinese have stood firmly by the commitments that have been made in the joint statement of 4th February, including blaming the West for the continued expansion of NATO. Now, this makes sense from the Chinese perspective, but the problem is the Chinese system is far more incorporated into the Western system than is Russia. So the global value addition chains flow between China and the West much more than they do between China and Russia. So there is a problem for the Chinese. I think they miscalculated. Now they're going to try and see how they can worm their way out of this discomfiture in which they find themselves. And they're trying to see how strong India will remain. Your question is absolutely right. But the only point I'd like to make there is that India has been consistent. India's position on Crimea, for instance, in 2014 was not dissimilar from what we have said here. At that time, it was a Manmohan Singh Congress government. I remember that then NSA had said that Russia has legitimate interests and concerns which should be met. This is a very, very complicated issue. To point fingers or blame one side or the other may not be quite appropriate. But the fact is that, commitments were made when the Soviet Union broke up, the Cold War ended. The Russians feel the commitments have not been fulfilled. The other side of the argument is that, look, we did what we did, you went along. So you can't blame us for that. Yeah. But, as we all know, when push comes to shove, things begin to get very difficult. And obviously, Moscow decided at some